This is Damian Macy, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library and our Oral History Project. Today is Wednesday, August the 17th of 2016, and I'm at the library with Mr. Ted Snedeker. And he's been a lifelong resident, but today he's going to be talking about his father, John G Snedeker, who was also a lifetime resident of Marshall and was a well-known builder and constructed many homes and buildings around in this area. So with that, I'll introduce you to Ted.
Hi, I want to talk about my father, Johnny Garrett Snedeker. He was born June 2nd, 1919. He died on August 3rd of 1989. He married Lila March Chapman, September 30th, 1940. Mom was born on March 7th, 1923. Dad was a building contractor and developer, a city councilman, board member of the Burnside Nursing Home, a Marshall Fire and Ambulance District Board member, Sunday School Superintendent at Marshall Wesleyan Church, and a World War II veteran of the U.S. Navy. Dad was a very devout, practicing Christian, and he was fond of quoting Will Rogers, "I never met a man I didn't like." He was truly mourned by his family and community at his passing. The thing I remember so much about my father is that everyone was treated the same. It didn't matter if it was the town drunk or Tony Holman come to buy a horse from us. They were all the same to Dad. And in later years, after he shut his business down and came to work for me, we went out and we were working in the telephone office in Honolulu. And that was the same office where the president of the telephone company had his office. And it didn't matter whether it was the president of the telephone company or the guard at the front gate. Dad treated everybody the same. And when his funeral came along, we stood for hours in the reception line. And the day of the funeral, the building was packed. There was standing room only. And they actually opened the windows, and there were people standing outside the funeral home at each open window to participate in the funeral.
Was that at Pierce's here?
No.
It had been
West Union.
West Union.
West
Okay.
Union, yeah. So Dad was born on the Homestead Farm, Wabash Township, a farm that his great-grandfather had homesteaded. And he grew up listening to anecdotal stories from his grandfather, who still remembered the homestead families and the actual homesteading where they came in and cleared off timber and burnt out stumps to make land to farm. Okay? So his roots were very deep in this county. Dad got a bicycle when he was just barely old enough to ride, and he would ride that bicycle all over the county. He'd ride that bicycle down to West Union, and I've heard him tell stories about he came home, he rode clear to West Union and came back one day, and he got home right in time to have supper. And he said he was so hungry he hadn't eaten all day that he ate so much he got sick.
So did he drive or ride his bicycle down the highway, Route 1, or did he go some back roads?
Back roads, down in the country on the mud and gravel. Yeah. And even to the day he died, he enjoyed riding a bicycle. He had a racing bike, one of those European racing bikes, and he would ride that even, right up until the day he died. Well, his love of riding a bicycle, as soon as he was old enough to get a driver's license, translated into getting a motorcycle. And from the time that I can remember, there was always a motorcycle. Now, we didn't always have a car. Sometimes we had a pickup, but we always had a motorcycle. And Dad was really good. He was an excellent rider. He could take a Harley Davidson 74 cubic inch road bike and ride out across the country like it was a dirt bike. And he liked working on them, riding them, racing them. He just loved motorcycles. During the war, Dad was in LaPorte, Indiana, where I was born. He was building a munitions plant in LaPorte, Indiana. And on December 12th, December 8th, the day after Pearl Harbor, he went down and joined the Navy. And they enlisted him as a third-class petty officer carpenter's mate with his experience and put him in PT boats. Now, he went to New London, Connecticut to train on PT boats and was put in John Kennedy's group and was supposed to go to the Solomon Islands when Kennedy went down there. But the day before they were to ship out, he got a really terminal case of athlete's foot. So they put him in the hospital. And it was ironic because this Bull Halsey had the same malady, and he missed the Battle of Midway. Well, Dad missed the Battle of the Solomon Islands where Kennedy's boat got cut in two. So that was kind of fortunate for him. A great deal of the people in his group never came back. But by the time he got out of the hospital, there weren't enough PT boats left to need a carpenter, so they put him on a repair ship called the Prometheus, USS Prometheus, and stationed in New Caledonia, French province down in the islands. And he spent the war on the Prometheus. Now that was a repair hub, and they would bring the damaged ships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, in there, and then they would patch them up, put bulkheads, wooden bulkheads, so that they could get them back to Pearl and fix them. Sometimes when they were so badly damaged they couldn't get the Noumea, they would take the Prometheus and they would sail up to where the ship was ballasted and work on it on site. Well, when they left their port, they were a prime target for Japanese submarines, because if you could eliminate a repair ship, you've eliminated a lot, So they were slow and a perfect target. And Dad, I remember him telling a story about listening to Tokyo Rose, and she called out the Prometheus and said, you guys on the Prometheus better write your wills and tell your families goodbye, because you'll never make it through the Java Strait. But they did, and they actually got in a gun battle with the Japanese submarine and sunk it. So he wasn't on a combat ship, but they did some combat.
So they had the full equipment then for battle.
Oh yeah, they had 5-inch guns. Yeah. So he came back he was in the Pacific to the end of the war, from the start to the end. He came home in 45. And came back to Marshall after traveling over around half the world. Came back to Marshall, Illinois, and never looked back. He loved this community. And I remember when we'd go on a trip and we'd come back and we'd cross the Illinois state line, and Dad would look up and he'd go, Good old Illinois. Always had to have an S on it, you know. Good old Illinois. Yes, he absolutely loved it here. So he came back and started building houses. Started his own business. He built the first house down on North 9th Street that he later sold to Emily Dickerson. He borrowed $5,000 and built the house, and we lived on what it didn't take to build a house was our living that year. And he did everything. He made the windows, he plumbed it, he wired it, did the heating. He built the entire house by himself. And in that era, it was right after World War II, he bought a carload of redwood, 1-inch shiplap redwood that he made the roof out of and put redwood weatherboarding and painted it white. Can you imagine?
That has some durability to it.
Oh yeah, it lasts forever. But you know, to take that beautiful redwood that you make cabinets and painted it white. But it was cheap, you know.
Ted, where did he develop or gain this experience to build and to do all this?
Good point. Dad had to quit school when he was a sophomore because there was just no money. And Granddad had rheumatoid arthritis. Now, he worked in his shop. He built windows for Tom Finley and Wilbur Moore, and that's how Dad met them. So Dad went to work for Wilbur Moore building houses for 10 cents an hour, okay? And he'd work 10-hour days and make $1 a day. And gave most of the money to Grandpa and Grandma to live on, okay? Because it's the only money they had. So that's where he worked for Tom Finley and Wilbur Moore and learned the building trade. So that by the time the war came along, he was working on that defense plant up there, hanging doors, and he'd go in there and put up hang doors from 8 to 5 or whatever, day in, day out.
Because building obviously has one trade to it and could be specialty in that, but you have to pick up the things that you mentioned of electrical, plumbing, and all of those things, the whole package.
Okay, well, on that repair ship that he was on,
okay,
they had equipment to make about anything that you wanted. They had milling machines.
okay.
He built a saltwater reel that I don't know what happened to it, but it was a beautiful saltwater reel the size of a big coffee can, okay? And all of the gears and the ball bearings and everything in this saltwater reel, he built it himself from the tools on that ship. So he learned, spent 3 years down there. What an education of pipe fitting.
Really opened the doors.
Yes. So when he came out of the Navy, he had a skill set that was beyond peer. So then he bought the circus grounds that was right across the street from where my grandmother and grandfather lived, and started developing that. He built the first house for Fenton Quinn up on the corner. Then he built Alden Stallings' house. Then he went across the street and built a spec house from where we were living. In the meantime, my mother got pregnant with my brother Van. Dad built a little house, little one-bedroom house right behind the Snedeker, the Matthew house that had been where my grandpa and grandma lived during the war, when I was growing up. Well, he went behind that, and right behind it, like from here to that chair, behind that house. The plan being that they were going to tear the old house down, okay? So he built the house so that his mom would have a brand new house. And the night they were supposed to move in the next day, my grandmother died that night. Well, Granddad had rheumatoid arthritis, and the trauma of losing his life mate put him in a wheelchair. He just froze up and went in a wheelchair. So I lost told you the story before, I lost my grandmother and my best friend. So he came to live with us, took a lot of care. My cousin Kenny was being abused by his stepfather because his mother died. So he came to live with us, and we outgrew the little house that Dad had built that we were all going to live in forever. So then we started moving down the street, and he would build a house, get it almost finished, we'd move into it, and then he'd start another one, and when we got the one finished we were living in, then we'd move to the next one that was almost finished. And we went right down the block until we ran out of houses. I ran out of block building lots. Then he moved to the farm.
Ted, as I recall, on the other side of that property, facing Route 1, there were several new houses built. Now, were those all by Stanfield?
No.
A lot of them were national homes, I think.
Those are prefab. Yeah, it was Percy. Percy Stanfield. Yeah, Percy Stanfield bought that and built prefabs in there.
And I remember on the corner, it would have been on, I guess the corner of Spruce and Route 1 was Van Arsdale's grocery store, and there had been a row of cabins back there, of course, the old days before motels. Did your dad have anything to do with acquiring that, or did Stanfield buy it? I don't know. It's where the First Bank and Trust is now.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Where Van Arsdale's store was is where the car wash is now, on that corner.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where the bank is, I think was a vacant lot.
I think that's vacant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a vacant lot. There were just trees in there, as I remember when I was, little. Then the next, where Donnie Stanfield had that building for a long time, Bill Pierce had a store.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bill had a pretty big store. It had glass. It was kind of like a supermarket today. It was a nice grocery store.
I remember that.
Van Arsdale was a little,
yeah.
like a bodega, a little deli. And
I remember once in a while, if I had an extra 10 cents, I could go over there and buy a Coke and a candy bar.
well, the difference was with Van Arsdale, you could charge, and he would you'd pay him when you got paid. Mm-hmm. So people would go in and charge their groceries. But Bill Pierce, you had to pay cash. Okay. Bill wasn't taking any charge cards. But Dad continued. We moved to the country. I tell a story about that last house we were living in town. And by that time, Kenny had come to live with us. Van and Eric were both there. They were little. And we were sitting at the kitchen table, and Dad said, "Come and get in the truck. We're going to take a ride." So Mom and the baby Eric got in the front, and Van and Kenny and I jumped in the back, and we drove out west of town, down the hill, up the hill, across Mill Creek, a big marathon sign. We turned. There was just 28 acres of brush. We went down through the little lane through the brush, and there was a house back there and a trailer. And Steve Shilson, his dad, was a cat skinner, and they were starting to build New 40. And he was living there, just using a place to park his trailer, right? So we went in there, and Dad attacked that 28 acres and built line fence all the way around the outside with hog wire and 2 strands of barb, creosote posts, concrete corner posts. Built it like a kitchen cabinet. And we went to farming. I mean, we farmed like we had cattle, we had pigs, Dad bought 200 chickens. Built a chicken house. We put up this 8-foot chicken wire fence around this probably an acre chicken lot. We might as well not bothered. those chickens, somebody had crossbred them with eagles. Those chickens could fly over. We had chickens all over that 28 acres. And we had foxes. Foxes loved us. We had these beautiful foxes, pair, and they would come and play in the field. And that was just, Mom just loved it, the foxes. But then we got the chickens, and all of a sudden, the foxes were not very popular because they'd leave a little pile of white feathers. And so Dad decided, okay, we're going to get rid of the foxes. He got James Jones to come out there with his high-powered .222 rifle, and he set up, because every morning the fox would come out to the edge of the woods, all right? So Jim got out and brought this big, fancy, expensive rifle, and he set up on his truck, and he's waiting for the fox to come out. The fox comes out, looks at Jim. Jim looks at the fox. Kaboom! By the time he kaboomed, the fox was gone. Last time we ever saw the fox, because he came at night after that. And there'd be a little white feathers, little white pile of feathers here and there.
You call him Big Foxy, I guess.
Yeah,
They get the message.
So after the twins were born on that farm, and we moved to he bought Russell Coon Farm east of town. It was 350 acres, big farm at that time. Because we discovered that you can work just as hard on 28 acres as you can on 300. So we moved, same story. We're having dinner one night. Dad says, we're going to take a ride. So we piled in a truck, drove down this gravel road east of town, and we drove and we drove. It turned to dirt and drove some more. Come to the top of this hill, and there was a shack. I mean, literally a shack. And so we turned in, and I thought, this is where we're going? But no, we drove right by that shack, down a real narrow lane where the trees came up over the top and just made a tunnel. We drove, we came up to the top of this hill, got out, and you could see across the entire Big Creek Valley. Dad says, Mommy, it's all ours, as far as the eye can see. So we drove down the hill, and what I began to see was brush. And we came down to the bottom of the hill, and we came across this bridge. There was brush on the right, there were brush on the left, there were brush ahead of us. We pulled up to the... I knew about brush, because I'd cut 28 acres of it before. And I said, I'll never be heard from again. I wonder if the Navy would take me. I could lie about my age. But as it turned out, I was prematurely pessimistic, because there's a big difference between clearing out 28 acres and 350. So Dad attacked that brush with dozers and chainsaws, and he, because Russell Coon had just let it grow up and grow up, and he got to where he was only farming 40 acres behind the house.
That's why I was wondering how much of that was farmable.
Well, about 300 acres of it was farmable.
After you cleared brush?
Oh yeah, after we cleared the brush, yeah. Some of that brush was like this, there were... So it was almost like great-great-grandfather coming back and clearing off the timber to make a farm. There's where I spent 4 years when I was in high school there. Now, I worked like a man on that farm. I mean, I drove a tractor and put up hay, and it was the cattle were my responsibility. I cut hogs and milked. And Dad didn't realize how much work I was doing until I went to the Navy, and I hadn't even been gone 6 months, and he sold the farm and came to town. Well, two things. One, he lost his main hand, and two, he was building the nursing home. And it was too much running back and forth and trying to farm, and, his business was really, really moving in town.
Who owns that farm or that land today?
Truggy Myers.
Okay.
Sold that to Truggy for $40,000. Can you imagine? It was right. It was right at right before the land took off. And if he'd have just kept it another probably 5 years, but it is what it is, right? So.
Now, did your dad build a new house on that property or reconstruct one that was there?
He remodeled.
Okay.
He remodeled it. And in fact, he remodeled that house completely before we moved in. It was 100% done when we moved in, which was a surprise to me. Yeah. Took Russell Coon's old house and redid it, put a big fireplace in it, and added a big living room, and had 3 bedrooms upstairs. I had my own bedroom for the first time.
To this building, and I know he owned his own business. Did he do much marketing, or was it just simply a word of mouth that people knew his ability and what kind of construction he did?
Word of mouth. Word of mouth. And he turned business away all the time. I mean, just people were just after him all the time because he built George Mitchell's house. Mm-hmm. He built Martin House, built James Jones's house. So if anybody was going to have a new house built, they wanted JG to build it. Okay, so he just turned business away all the time, and then of course he got busy building these nursing home and the coil sales and
Excuse me. Did you or your brothers get involved in any of that construction?
Yeah, my brother Eric. In fact, he's still doing it today. I worked on. See, I worked on the farm. I didn't get paid for working on a farm. That was just what you did.
Sure. Part of the household.
That's household, yeah. But when I worked on construction, I got paid, and I got paid good. So I like working Saturdays because those were the days that I got paid for it and had my own money.
You mentioned several houses there, Dr. Mitchell's and all. Did an architect or someone draw up those plans? Did he do them? Was it a joint effort with both? Or someone say, hey, build me a house? And
it was kind of a mixed bag. Some people would bring some ideas. They'd have some pictures. They'd bring a picture of a house. And they'd say, we want a house that looks like that. So Dad would sit down with his drawing board and he would draw it up. And they'd go out and they'd build it. Sometimes, like the nursing home, of course, they had an architect. Mm-hmm. And he built from architectural plans. An architect designed George Mitchell's house. James Jones's house was a hybrid. He had an idea what he wanted, and Dad just sat down and drew up the rest of it, and they built it from that.
So, how did that contact originally come about?
Through the Turners, because Andy Turner, Loney came to town and said, we need somebody to build some buildings out here for us at the colony. And so that's where she met Dad. And he built, a few of those little shacks for him out there to start with. So that, and then he and Andy Turner, of course Turner was he wired houses and stuff. So yeah. And Harold plumbed some of Dad's houses. So the Turners and Dad, they were tight. So that's how.
But your dad maintained, I think, a long-term association, what you'd said earlier, with Jones.
Oh, yeah. Long as Jones was here, he was in and out of our house like, he was just like family. He loved my mom's cooking. You could never tell when he was going to show up. It'd be about mealtime, though.
Good plan.
Yeah. So I know one time Mom got so mad because she had some cups from the restaurant that she owned during the war. And they were, they're kind of a tan restaurant. World War II restaurants all had these kind of tan stoneware cups.
Yeah, okay.
And there was one that had a broken handle. And JG being JG, he gave Jones the cup with the broken handle. And Jones says, don't you have any cups in this house that have a real handle? And JG says, no, Jim, all our handles in this house are broke. And made my mom so mad. Jones left and she picked up a loaf of bread and threw it clear across the table. Because Dad was a joker. He loved practical jokes. And they on the job sites, they would compete with each other. They were tarring a roof one time, and Hubert Titus was the last one to come down, and they'd all cleaned up their hands with this turpentine. So that turpentine was gone, so Dad took it over and ran the turpentine can full of water. So Hubert come down, and Hubert's talking, and he said, I need some of that. So Dad poured some of that water on. He'd scrub his hand, and nothing would happen. Right. And he's talking about, need some more of that turpentine. So Dad poured some of that water on. And the rest of them were rolling on the ground.
From his construction and all, did he keep in touch with some of the fellows he had met in the Navy at all?
Yeah. Yeah, he had his best friend was my godfather. His name was Ted Crane. Huh. And he lived in St. Louis, and we used to go back and forth down and visit with him quite a bit. And then his best friend in the Navy was a guy named Earl Brocklerhurst. And Earl lived in New Bern, North Carolina. And actually Earl came back to Marshall and went to work for Dad for a couple of years. And then he went back to, his wife didn't like it up here. She's in North Carolina. So drug him back to North Carolina. But yeah, they kept in touch right up till when Earl died.
Well, your dad, I know, was involved in several construction of businesses downtown. One of them, I saw the picture there, was where the building burned on the corner of 7th and Archer Avenue. Mm-hmm. And I think Frank Mitchell had his dentist office in there.
Right.
And Dr. E.H. Mitchell, who was my grandmother's doctor, had a doctor's office in part of the building too.
Yeah.
And they both moved to other places, of course, after the fire. Mm-hmm. But your dad built that new building, I think.
Yeah, not only did he build it, he sat down and designed it on it, drew it up, and built the whole building. Yeah. Its first customer was Fenton Quinn and Klein. Burton Klein and Fenton Quinn were partners there in that corner office building, had their insurance. And one day, Bert came in, and there was a note on his desk from his partner, Fenton Quinn, and he said, Bert, I'm gone, and unlike MacArthur, I will not return. And he left.
What was originally up on the second floor of that building then?
I don't remember.
I don't either.
They're just offices, Oh, I know exactly what was up there. Seaboard Loan Company. Yeah.
Right.
Because my wife had a job worked up there. And that was that was the first time I met her. As I went up, I was on my way to Chicago, and I thought maybe I'd pick up get a loan. So I went up and talked to Joe Snedeker. But she was up there, and that was the first time I talked to her. And then that was when I asked her if we might have a date when I came home sometime. She said, yeah. Then of course, I stood her up on our first date. Well, it's one of those things seemed like a good idea at the time.
The building where Cooper's Laundry is now, I know your dad had some involvement of that one. There was a gas station there. Did he take the building completely down?
Well, there were two
Or-
things. There was a gas station and a little like one very narrow office building.
Yeah.
And he tore all that down, cleaned it out, and put in Jay's Con Laundry.
Okay, he didn't use any of the existing building.
No,
was there?
no,
Okay.
tore it down to the ground. Yeah, it's all brand new. That was quite a unique design. You know, he built that building and put in swamp coolers that normally in this climate don't work, but he made those so big and had these huge fans, these squirrel cage fans, and they worked fine. You could go in that laundry, you know, when it was 100 degrees outside, and it would be comfortable. You know, it wouldn't be refrigeration comfortable, but with all those dryers and everything running in there, it was quite a unique design. Then he went to Robinson, built another one. So for 20 years, he and Mom ran both those laundries, one in Robinson and one up there.
Okay, I knew he had the one here, but I didn't realize it had one in Robinson.
Oh yeah, he built a laundry and a car wash down there. Went there again. He bought an old building and went to the fire department. Went to the city and said, "I want to burn that in place," and they approved it and set up a curtain wall of water and burnt that building in place right downtown. Cleaned it all up and built a whole brand spanking new building. Again, designed by hand on his board. Put in a car wash. So for about 20 years there, they ran that. You know, he'd piddle around with his construction, but mostly they were running those laundries.
But he always kept a motorcycle too, didn't he?
There was always a motorcycle. Yeah. Toward the end, he got BMWs instead of Harleys, but yeah, there was always a motorcycle. Right before he died, he went up and got his license renewed, and he was 70. When he had his birthday, he had to get a new license, and he had to ride, you know, pass a test. And he went and passed his test. He was so proud of that. Unlike his older son, who sold all his motorcycles. But when Dad was riding, there weren't all these deer around either.
The risk factor is a little different.
Oh my! And the traffic.
Even the traffic.
Yeah.
Are there particular things that you remember about your dad, say, such as, you know, his favorite meals? Your mother was obviously a good cook. That he was really, that's something that's a special day for him.
I don't remember that so much. I remember him wanting things that Mom wouldn't fix because he liked cornmeal mush, okay? And you know, fried cornmeal mush, he liked it, but it was such a traumatic memory for my mother because during the Depression, that's all they had.
Yeah.
Week in and week out, and she absolutely refused to fix it. And I knew he'd complain about that all the time. And another thing he liked was tamales. And she didn't like those either, so she wouldn't fix those. But Mom was a great cook. And she fixed 3 meals a day all the time. We lived in town, and then in the summer, we'd have harvest crew come, and she'd fix huge meals for a whole harvest crew. And of course, we lived on a farm. We had our own beef, we had our own pork, and our chickens, you know.
With that love of motorcycles, did he have some other hobbies also?
You know, Dad worked. That was about his only hobby. Now, he liked to fish, and he would go with, you know, Short Gardner. Do you remember him?
No, I don't.
I think he was a union carpenter out of Terre Haute. Lived down on South 5th Street, corner. They called him Short. I think he was 6'5". They called him Short Gardner. And he and Dad and Pete Lee used to go around and they'd fish the different ponds for bass. And when he built the lake out west of town, then all of his buddies would go around and catch fish to go turn loose in his pond. Okay, so that was quite a well-stocked pond out there.
So did your dad actually at a point retire? Or
He
did he just simply taper down his business and
No,
less
he,
than
he
that?
shut down his business. In 1982, he was diagnosed with lymph node cancer.
Okay.
And I was working in Washington State. I had a job that I loved. I would have paid them to let me do it. I was a sales engineer for Northern Telecom, and I was going around to these different telephone companies, conventions, making presentations, selling state-of-the-art telephone equipment. And Mom wrote me a letter, said, your dad's got terminal cancer and you need to come home.
Quite a letter to get.
So every house in maybe not everyone, but it seemed like every house in my neighborhood was for sale. And where I was living in Washington, all right? I thought, well, I'm kind of stuck here. I know I'm not going to be able to get out of this house. So I came in to the airport. I was flying out of a little grass strip there in Vancouver, Washington. And came in, went up to the fixed base operator there, and a guy come out that owned the airport. He said, hey, Ted, there's a new guy come to town. He's a pilot, and I want you to meet him. Well, they had a little restaurant there at the airport. So we went in and had coffee with this guy, and he had the same kind of plane I did. He had a 182, so we talked airplanes, and he's new, and he said, yeah, I'm going to have to buy a house since coming to town. And I said, well, my house is not exactly for sale, but told him my story about my dad. And said, would you want to come and take a look at mine? Yeah, sure, I'll do that. So we came out, and he absolutely fell in love with it. I had bought this house. It was the last house in a subdivision, and that was for sale. And I went in, and I bought that house, and the guy that was selling said, well, why don't you just buy both of these, and then I'll get out of here. And so I did. I ended up buying both houses, and they were all, the lawns weren't in, they were just houses set on dirt, okay? So I went in and I completely landscaped both places, put in trees, I worked my rear end off. Kay and I both did. And we landscaped, and our house was backed up to a gully that went down, probably 5 or 6 stories deep, okay? So you couldn't build behind it. And there were trees in the back, so the view was beautiful. It was private. And then the other place, I ended up trading it for the airplane. That's how I got my airplane, because the fixed base operator needed. So I got my airplane that way. So this guy comes and looks at my house, fell in love with it. And I told him, I said, well, I'm going to have X amount of dollars. Fine, no problem. Yeah. So he left. And I said, well, I guess that's the Jason, putting out the fleece. Sold the house when we came home. Well, we came home, and I started building my house down there. Kay's dad gave us 10 acres to build that house on. And I started building that house, and we had a prayer service, a healing service at the church for Dad. And he went up to Danville the next day after that healing service, and it was gone. And the doctor said, well, we must have got the wrong x-rays, must have misdiagnosed it. Hey, I felt them. They were like golf balls. Gone. So You know, it is what it is. I know the day he died, we were supposed to pour his driveway at 7. And I went up to the house to help him, and no concrete trucks. So I went to the office, and at noon he called me. He said, the trucks are here. So I went down and helped him, and we pulled the concrete down the screeds and got the concrete, put the bull float and got it all floated off. And I put in the expansion cracks, and he was doing the final steel troweling, and I cleaned up around this. Anything else that I can do for you? No. He said, I'll get this. Well, I never pleased him doing the steel troweling, so I just went back to the office. So I went back to my office, sat down behind my desk. He got up off the slab, went in, took a shower, laid down in bed and died. Well, I went up there to the house, and I was just lost. And I was out cleaning up the rest of the stuff where we'd been doing the concrete. And I said, why couldn't have I had just 5 more years? You know, just 5 more years. And this voice came in my head and said, you had your 5 years. Yeah. You had your 5 years. So you can believe that, you cannot, but that's
Where was he living at that time?
Down on, you know where the little mall is, that little strip mall out down there, right? And the car wash and that strip mall. Okay, if you take that street and come back west about 3 blocks and right back there.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Well, Ted, I sure appreciate you visiting with us, and your dad was a very important part of the community. He was very well known. I know my dad was a good friend of his. Mm-hmm. I knew him very well myself, and I think you hit on a key point. Everyone knew and liked Johnny Snedeker. So you can certainly be very proud of that kind of a track record, and appreciate you sharing some of your thoughts and your memories of us with him. I know it can be some sad times, but there's also some good memories.
Yeah, of course, of course.
And the book of the Snedekers there, I think, is also a nice step forward to keep things documented and all. And I think we want to say thank you because, as I said to you, this is not really just for today or tomorrow, but the Oral History Project for the future. Mm-hmm. And people can say, gee, I didn't know about him that way. I didn't know he did that.
Right.
So we really appreciate you sharing with us.
Good.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.